Curtis Wendam, 57 years old, 31 years on death row. In the early hours of February 7, 1992, Curtis Wendam discovered that Johnny Lee, a friend who owed him close to $2,000, had recently won about $100 at the dog track. Wendam promised that he would kill Lee and that Jack Luckett, the man who had informed him of Lee's gains, would make sure to read about it. According to the sales receipt, Wendam bought a .38 caliber revolver from Walmart on the same day. Wendam was described by the store clerk who sold him the rifle as being as calm as could be. After making the purchase, Lee was talking to two women by the side of the road when Wendam found him. Lee was shot twice in the back by Wendam, who had pulled up next to him. Wendam then exited the vehicle and shot Lee once again quite closely. Then Wendam took off running in the direction of the apartment building where his love Valerie Davis and her mother Mary Lubin resided. Wendam, who shared a kid with Davis, had occasionally resided with her. A friend of Davis's named Cassandra Hall had just arrived at the apartment when Wendam shot Davis once in the chest. Davis was shot and murdered without being the provoker, according to Hall. Wendam shot Kenneth Williams in the chest at close range as he was leaving the residence. Williams made it through the shooting. He saw that Wendam was weird and obviously upset just before shooting him. When numerous men attempted to take the gun away from Wendam, he escaped behind Brown's bar. Valerie Davis's mother, Mary Lubin, had discovered that her daughter had been shot by this point and was returning home. Wendam approached Lubin's car after spotting her at a stop sign. Before killing Lubin with 2 shots, Wendam muttered something to her. On 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, Wendam was found guilty. Charles Finny, 69 years old, 31 years on death row. Around 2 p.m. on January 16, 1991, Sandra Sutherland's body was found on the bed in her apartment. In addition to being bound and gagged, she had also suffered 13 backstab wounds, all but one of which had entered the lungs. Sutherland's bedroom had been broken into, her purse's contents had been thrown on the ground, and her VCR was gone. There were many fingerprints recovered in the flat, including prints on a piece of paper and a pot of face cream that was discovered in the bedroom. A nearby pawn shop was where the VCR was found. A fingerprint on a pawn shop receipt for Charles Finny, who had pawned the VCR for a $30 loan, matched the fingerprint on the evidence discovered at the flat and on the VCR. Finny claimed that he was homesick and never left his flat when asked by police where he was on the day of the murder. When the police discovered that Finny had pawned Sutherland's VCR, Finny claimed that he had discovered it while putting out his rubbish and had pawned it for money. Finny used to live next door to Sutherland, but 8 months before the murder, she moved to a separate apartment in the same building. Sutherland contacted Finny about installing a screen on her patio at her new apartment, and he was in Sutherland's apartment to assist her with moving boxes, according to Finny's testimony. Alfred Finny, 62 years old, 31 years on death row. Driving a 1986 Cadillac, Mary Sheerin departed her house on September 8, 1991. 2 men discovered a body on the side of the road later that day, face down. Police officers found the victim with the hands bound behind the back and a single gunshot wound to the back of the skull. The body was identified as belonging to Mary Sheerin by police afterwards. Police discovered her car on September 9, 1991, being driven by 2 males who gave their names as Ezel Foster and Ansel Rose. Police discovered a piece of rope that matched the rope used to bound Sheerin's hands when the car was seized, along with the .25 caliber revolver that fired the bullet that was retrieved from the victim's body. Further police inquiry revealed that Alfred Finny was using the identity Ezel Foster and Michael Frazier was using the alias Ansel Rose. Police also discovered that Sheerin's ATM card had been used to withdraw money from her account. Finny and Frazier accused each other of being involved in the abduction and murder of Sheerin. John Markard, 57 years old, 30 years on death row. Stacy Willets, the victim, and 2 men, John Markard and Mike Abshire, drove from North Carolina to Florida in June 1991. They all intended to relocate to Florida and would split the cost by traveling together. Mrs. Willets' car was supposed to be used by the 3. Before they left North Carolina, Markard and Abshire discussed murdering Miss Willett in exchange for her car and money. Markard told Abshire that he would murder Miss Willett that evening on June 20th, 1991. He claimed that he wanted to kill her because he was fed up with their arguments. The three stopped in South Carolina, where the conversation took place. When the group of three arrived in St. Augustine, Markard and Abshire made the decision to assassinate Miss Willett by luring her into the woods. They convinced her to accompany them by claiming she had been invited to a party. The three walked into the woods after driving her in a deserted spot. Markard stabbed Miss Willett after approaching her from behind. She eventually collapsed to the ground on her stomach. When Markard discovered she was still breathing, he pressed her face into a puddle until she stopped. He then sat on her back. Then, when Mrs. Willett's body started to shake, Markard pushed her face once more into the puddle. Abshire started participating in the crime by stabbing the body of Miss Willett. The two then made an effort to cut Miss Willett's head off the body. Markard confessed after being detained for the crime. He claimed to have no recollection of the crime, simply of entering the woods and approaching Miss Willett while holding a knife. Abshire gave a thorough account of the slaying. Brett Bogle, 54 years old, 30 years on death row. On September 13, 1991, Brett Bogle was found guilty of murdering Margaret Torres and given the death penalty. 4 to 5 nights a week, Margaret Torres spent time with her sister, Katie Alfonso. Alfonso first met the defendant in June 1991, and shortly after that, Bogle moved in with the two sisters. Torres and Bogle never got along, so Alfonso had to ask Bogle to leave. On September 1, 1991, a week after Bogle moved out, the three continued to be acquaintances and went out together. Bogle and Torres got into a fight throughout the night. To prevent Torres from calling the police, Bogle forced his way past Alfonso and through the screen door when the sisters refused to let him inside their home. If Torres informed the authorities and filed a report, Bogle threatened to murder her. A few days after the event, Bogle called Alfonso and threatened to kill Torres if she reported the incident to the police. On September 13, 1991, Bogle saw Torres in a nearby bar. According to witnesses, Bogle entered the bar unharmed and clean, and he and Torres had a brief conversation. 5 minutes after Torres left the establishment at 1 a.m., Bogle also was spotted leaving. Bogle's face was scratched, his rear end was wet, and his clothes were filthy when he was seen 45 minutes later outside the bar. The following day, Torres's naked body was discovered close to the bar. Medical examiners discovered she had been essayed and she had been badly battered. Her head had also been crushed with a piece of cement. The evidence matched Bogle's DNA. Frederick Cecil, 65 years old, 30 years on death row. Cecil was found guilty of killing his ex-girlfriend Katie Good and given the death penalty. Before their relationship ended, Frederick Cecil and Katie Good had been dating and sharing housing for a while. Good obtained a restraining order against Cecil after he assaulted her at a neighbor's home and proceeded to harass her. Good was repeatedly threatened verbally by Cecil, who said, "Katie, I'm going to murder you. I am going to murder you, Katie." He also said that he loved her and that nobody else could have her if he couldn't. The Good home was broken into by Cecil early on September 16, 1991. He went into Good's room where she was asleep and repeatedly stabbed her. While fast asleep next to Good, her 8-year-old son heard his mother screaming and saw Cecil punching her. Good's nephew, who was 20 years old, saw Cecil leave the scene while he was asleep on the bedroom floor. Cecil was met by Good's mother in the hallway as he was running away, and in his haste to get away, he knocked her to the ground. Good, bleeding and injured, stumbled from her chamber and cried out in her mother's arm, "Fred, Fred." Medical examiners came to the conclusion that Good died as a result of her numerous stab wounds. She practically drowned in her own blood as her lungs filled with fluid. After the attack, she was alert for a while and continued wondering what was taking the emergency staff so long, according to reports. Victor Jones, 62 years old, 30 years on death row. Matilda Nestor, 66 years old, and Jacob Nestor, 67 years old, were found dead in their place of business on December 19, 1990. New hire Victor Tony Jones was discovered with a .22 caliber automatic weapon under his arm, slumped over the couch in the main office. Jacob Nestor was discovered in the main office with a stab wound to the chest, while Matilda Nestor was discovered in the toilet with a stab wound to the back. The evidence shows that Jones attacked Matilda Nestor as she entered the restroom and Jacob Nestor as he was walking from the main office into the restroom. After being stabbed, Jacob Nestor went back to the main office and made an attempt to telephone for assistance. Then, after taking his .22 caliber revolver out of his holster, he fired 5 shots at Jones, striking him once in the forehead. Jones's pockets contained Nestor's cash and personal belongings. Jones' response to the question, "What happened?" was, "The old man shot me." After being brought to the hospital, Jones informed the nurse that he had to go since he had killed those people. Jones gave the reason, "They owed me money and I had to kill them." John Reese, 58 years old, 30 years on death row. Reese was found guilty of killing Charlene Austin and given the death penalty. He was acquainted with Austin through Jackie Greer, a close friend of Austin who served as his occasional girlfriend. Because of her close friendship with Greer, Reese had already expressed envy of Austin. Charlene was discovered essayed and dead in her bedroom on January 28, 1992. Greer and a neighbor visited her house because they were worried about not being able to contact her. She was lying under a sheet in the bedroom when they entered through an unlocked door. Reese's handprint was visible on the waterbed in Austin's bedroom, according to the authorities. When he was questioned by the police, he admitted to the crime. He claimed to have entered Austin's house illegally and waited for her to return. He also said that he was afraid and hid in the closet when Austin finally got home 4 hours later. When she fell asleep on the couch, he emerged from the closet. Reese claimed that he panicked when Austin began to move. Then, after dragging her into the bedroom, he essayed her before strangling her with an electrical cord. Ronnie Ferell, 59 years old, 30 years on death row. A witness stated that on 22nd of April 1991, the victim, Gino Mayhew, was selling crack cocaine outside of his car when Kenneth Hartley and 2 co-defendants, Ronnie Ferell and Sylvester Johnson, approached him. The witness observed Hartley pull Mayhew into the driver's seat while holding a gun to his head. Ferell slid into the front passenger seat and Hartley took the seat in the rear, behind Mayhew. Johnson followed the car, a Chevrolet Blazer, out of the parking lot in a pickup. Police discovered Mayhew slumped in the driver's seat on April 23, 1991, suffering from 5 gunshot wounds, 1 to the forehead, 3 to the back of his head, and 1 to the shoulder. Leonardo Franchi, 53 years old, 30 years on death row. Pablo San Martin, 56 years old, 30 years on death row. Ricardo Gonzalez, 53 years old, 29 years on death row. Leonardo Franchi robbed the Kislak National Bank in North Miami, Florida, along with co-defendants Ricardo Gonzalez, Pablo San Martin, and 2 other accomplices on January 3, 1992. A cash box was stolen from one of the drive-thru tellers during the heist, which also resulted in the shooting and death of a security guard. Gonzalez confessed to the crime after being stopped by police on January 18, 1992, and he also blamed Franchi for the robbery. San Martin admitted to the robbery as well. On January 18th, when the police questioned Franchi, he also confessed to the crime. James Ducket, 66 years old, 35 years on death row. On the evening of May 11, 1987, in the Florida city of Mascot, James Ducket was the only policeman out on patrol. Around 10 p.m., Teresa McCabe, age 11, strolled to a convenience store to buy a pencil and, as she was leaving, paused to chat with a 16-year-old male outside the shop. Soon after, Ducket entered the convenience store and asked the shopkeeper how old McCabe was before approaching the man and the youngster. Ducket instructed McCabe to go home after a brief talk, leaving the youngster to wait for his uncle. The 16-year-old and his uncle saw McCabe enter the passenger side of Duckett's patrol vehicle. McCabe's mother went to the convenience shop around 11 p.m. in search of her daughter. The mother was informed by the store clerk that McCabe had left the premises with Ducket and was most likely at the Mascot police station. The mother drove to the nearby Groveland police station and reported her daughter missing after no one was located at the Mascot police station. Ducket arrived at the Groveland police station in 20 minutes after the Groveland police officer made contact with a Mascot police officer. Using a photo of Maccabi, Ducket created a flyer that he promised to publish at local convenience stores, but he never did. The store clerk stated that Ducket stopped by about 9:30 p.m., but did not return for a few hours, despite the fact that the police drove by the business every hour. Additionally, from 9:50 p.m. and 12:10 a.m., Ducket did not make any radio calls. Maccabi's body was discovered in a lake the following morning, less than a mile from the convenience store where she had been last seen. Medical evidence proved that she had been essayed while still alive, before drowning. Her underwear had blood, and later it was determined that genetic material of Ducket was also present. The tires found on the patrol cars of the Mascot Police Department were linked to distinctive tire tracks seen at the scene. She was apparently sitting backwards on the car's hood because Ducket and McBeeb fingerprints were discovered there. 3 witnesses who were between the ages of 17 and 19 stated at the trial that Ducket had made advances and given rides to each of them in the 6 months before the murder. One of the girls admitted in court that she had relations with Ducket. Norberto Petri, 60 years old, 33 years on death row. Petri was waiting to be transferred to a more secure facility when he was at the Lantana Community Correctional Work Release Center. He fled the center on August 18, 1988. He consumed cocaine throughout the course of the following 4 days and committed burglaries to get the cash he needed. On August 22, 1988, one such incident happened. A .38 caliber pistol and a 9mm semi-automatic rifle were among the goods Petri seized from a home. Petri was operating a stolen silver pickup truck prior to the break-in. A witness observed a man speeding by Officer Chappell in a silver pickup truck. That man was eventually recognized as Petri. Officer Chappell was searching for speeding drivers while riding his motorcycle. Petri halted the truck after being pursued by Officer Chappell for almost a mile. The officer allegedly approached the truck while carrying a revolver in his holster, according to witnesses. Within 2 to 4 feet of the truck, the officer was shot once in the chest. Officer Chappell reported being shot over the radio. His revolver was still in its holster when the first officer arrived on the scene, according to him, but the strap had been unsnapped. Officer Chappell died as a result of the gunshot. Petri drove to his nephew's home after leaving the scene. He dumped the truck into a canal near Florida Turnpike to dispose of it. On the inside of the driver's window, Petri's fingerprint was discovered. He stole another car on August 24, 1988. He was recognized by an officer who was not wearing a uniform. Petri made a gun-wielding threat before running away. Later that evening, Petri stole a car from a young couple's driveway. While the husband went back in the house to get something, the wife was sitting in the driver's seat. Petri sprang into the car and insisted that the wife take the wheel. The man said, "Drive or I'll shoot you." Petri began to drive away after pushing her out of the vehicle when she hesitated. In order to let the spouse remove the infant from the rear seat, Petri did slow down. The stolen car was discovered by a policeman. He signaled for the officer to approach the car as he came to a stop. Petri ran away as the cop approached with his rifle pulled. A car pursuit took place, then Petri lost control of the vehicle. He leaped off the vehicle and started to flee. He reached inside his pants while running, took out a bag of cocaine, and put it in his mouth. Petri was detained after a policeman caught up to him. According to a forensic expert's testimony, Chappell was shot between 3 and 8 feet away, and the 9mm bullet that killed him matched the bullet casings from the stolen weapons. Juan Rodriguez, 67 years old, 33 years on death row. Rodriguez was found guilty of Abelardo Saladriga's first-degree murder, armed robbery, conspiring to commit a crime, attempted armed robbery, armed burglary with an assault, aggravated assault, and an attempted first-degree murder. The incidents that led to these convictions took place over the course of 2 days. On April 22, 1988, Rodriguez visited a bondsman and got to know Ramon Fernandez and Carlos Sponsa there. Rodriguez's bail was paid for by Fernandez, who provided the bondsman the title to his car. Rodriguez told Fernandez that he would be able to pay him back with the money. Sponsa and Fernandez met with Rodriguez on May 13, 1988, to seek the unpaid bail money. The 2 men were instructed to accompany Rodriguez to an auto parts store because he knew where they could acquire the money. Sponsa and Fernandez were directed by Rodriguez to wait in their car outside the front of the shop while he made his way around the rear. Rodriguez approached Abelardo Saladrigas at the store's back exit after spotting him. In order to get Saladrigas' briefcase and watch, Rodriguez pulled a revolver on him. Saladrigas did not obey. Rodriguez shot him 4 times, stole his watch and briefcase, and then fled back to his car. Sponsa and Fernandez asserted that they ran away as soon as they heard the opening shot. Later, Rodriguez gave Fernandez the other half of the $1,200 he had discovered in the suitcase. The Rolex watch was kept by Rodriguez for himself. Before he passed away, Saladrigas was able to recount the events to a member of his family, a police officer, and a store employee. Saladrigas suffered 2 wounds to his right arm, 1 to the upper left chest, 1 to the right knee, 1 to the right chest, and 2 fatal wounds to the right chest as well. Saladrigas' body had 6 wounds, but the medical examiner determined that 4 of them were compatible with gunshot wounds. Rodriguez, Fernandez, and other men made an attempt to rob a home the day after the murder. The homeowner had a gun and fired 3 shots at the men, but they were unsuccessful. One of the criminals Rodriguez was traveling with fired back once. Fernandez was detained 3 weeks after the attempted home invasion robbery. He admitted to taking part in both the attempted robbery and the crime at the auto parts store. Rodriguez was detained when Fernandez admitted to authorities that he had shot Saladrigas. Francisco Reyes stated that he offered Rodriguez $3,000 to kill Fernandez in the county jail before Rodriguez's trial, saying that if Fernandez died, the state would no longer have a witness for the case against him. Rodriguez was found guilty of every charge in the indictment on January 31, 1990. He received a death sentence on March 28, 1990 for the murder of Saladrigas. Ronald Heath, 62 years old, 33 years on death row. To visit Heath's grandmother in Jacksonville, Ronald Heath and his roommate Penny Powell took a car. Powell returned to their home in Douglas, Georgia following a disagreement with Heath. Heath and his brother Kenneth took the car to Gainesville to visit some acquaintances. Heath and Kenneth visited 2 of Heath's buddies who were waitresses at the Purple Purpose Lounge that evening, May 24, 1989. The boys struck up a conversation with Sheridan, a traveling salesman, throughout the course of the evening. He bought the brothers a drink and then asked if they used Mary Jane. The brothers agreed to rob Sheridan at a different location at Heath's suggestion. The group was transported by Heath and Kenneth's car to a remote part of Alachua County. All 3 of them got out of the car after Heath had parked it on a dusty road and started smoking Mary Jane. Heath then questioned Kenneth, "Did you get it?" while waving a revolver in the air. Kenneth returned with a small caliber handgun after reaching under the car's seat. Sheridan was told he was being robbed as Kenneth pointed a gun at him. When Sheridan made it clear that he wouldn't be giving the brothers anything, Heath encouraged Kenneth to shoot Sheridan once in the chest. Heath kicked Sheridan as he started to remove his belongings, stabbed him in the neck with a hunting knife, and made an unsuccessful effort to slit his throat. Then, after getting the go-ahead from Keith, Kenneth shot Sheridan twice in the head with the gun. When they got back to the Purple Purpose, they moved Sheridan's rental car to a different spot and burned it after removing some items. They then moved the body farther into the woods. The brothers used Sheridan's credit cards the next day to make a number of purchases at a Gainesville shopping center. Even though Kenneth had signed all of the credit card slips, several store employees were able to identify Heath from a photo lineup. After being confronted with biographical inquiries they were unable to adequately respond to, the brothers stopped using the credit cards and went back to Jacksonville. The handgun they threw into the St. Johns River was never found. Heath went back to the Georgia trailer he and Powell shared. Several weeks after the murder, Heath was detained at his trailer for using the credit cards that had been taken. Powell granted the officers permission to search the trailer. The police discovered Sheridan's watch and several apparel items that had been bought with his credit cards. Guillermo Arbeláez, 66 years old, 32 years on death row. On February 14, 1988, Guillermo Arbeláez was found guilty and given the death penalty for the abduction and murder of Julio Rivas, a 5-year-old boy. Arbeláez met the victim's mother, Graciela Alfara, at a cafeteria where she was a waiter. After a while, Arbeláez moved in with Alfara, paying $150 a month for a room he would share with Alfara's cousin, who was 19 years old. Soon after Arbeláez moved in, the two of them got close, but when Alfara accused him of essaying one of her daughters, the relationship quickly terminated. Alfara gave the defendant till February 15, 1988, to leave. Arbeláez claimed that he and Alfara, who were scheduled to be married on February 15, 1988, were still together at the time, but on February 13, Alfara returned home after hours with a different man, and Arbeláez saw her kiss him goodnight. Alfara slept the following morning, and Arbeláez removed her son Julio Rivas from the house. At Alfara's workplace, Arbeláez made a coffee stop, and observers noted that he appeared composed and normal. There, Arbeláez told a friend of his that Alfara had been unfaithful and that he was going to do something to ensure that she would never forget him. Arbeláez drove to the top of the Powell Bridge after leaving the cafeteria, pulled over, and raised the hood of his vehicle to make it appear as though he had broken down. The youngster was then grabbed by the arms and thrown over the edge of the 70-foot-high bridge by Arbeláez. He then sped away from the incident, left his car in a nearby neighborhood, and made his way to the house of his buddy, Pedro Salazar. Arbeláez admitted to Salazar that he wished to get revenge on Alfara. He took a flight to Puerto Rico before returning to his native country of Colombia, where he was found on March 16, 1988, by Miami cops. He was detained at Miami International Airport on April 11, 1988, as soon as he exited customs. A medical examiner testified during Julio Rivas's trial that he drowned and he was also strangled to death. The boy's body had numerous huge bruises and his head had numerous abrasions. The pathologist concluded that these injuries were sustained before he passed away. Alfara said in court that her son didn't have the scrapes and bruises the morning he was taken. William Sweet, 56 years old, 32 years on death row. William Sweet was found guilty of killing 13-year-old Felicia Bryant, and he received a death sentence. 3 men physically harassed and robbed Marcine Kofer in her apartment in June 1990. Kofer was able to place 2 of her attackers by name, and on June 26, 1990, she was transported to the police station to use photos to try to place the 3rd attacker. The following evening, Detective Robinson returned Kofer to her apartment. As Kofer left the detective, William Sweet was observing from a distance. Sweet had already named himself to a friend as the 3rd person responsible for the assault and robbery. Kofer asked her next-door neighbor, Mattie Bryant, if she could let her 2 children, Felicia and Sharon Bryant, stay with her in her apartment that same evening. Around 8 p.m., Mattie consented, and the girls headed over to Kofer's house. Sharon reported hearing a loud kick on the apartment door about 1 a.m. Kofer was awakened, and she told her about the noise. Kofer looked around and urged Sharon not to be concerned because it seemed that whoever had been there had left. Kofer then returned to her bed. Sharon again informed Kofer when she noticed someone yanking on the screen in the living room. Then Kofer peered through her front door's peephole and saw Sweet standing in front of the flat. Felicia was instructed by Kofer to bang on the bathroom wall in order to wake her neighbor and mother, Mattie Bryant. A few minutes later, Mattie hurried over. Kofer was positioned at the end of the line behind the door as the other 3 women lined up. William Sweet pushed his way inside the apartment as they tried to escape while attempting to hide his face with a pair of jeans. Sweet started shooting at Kofer before moving on to the other 3 women. It was 6 shots. Both Kofer and Felicia received 2 shots. The gunshot wounds to Felicia's abdomen and hand caused her death. On June 28, 1990, William Sweet was detained. Stephen Taylor, 54 years old, 32 years on death row. Taylor was found guilty of killing Alice Vest and given the death penalty. On September 15, 1990, at around 11:30 p.m., Vest arrived at her mobile home. Taylor and his co-defendant Gerald Murray were dropped off close to the victim's area at around midnight after traveling around and listening to the radio with a 3rd person. A Ford Ranchero was reported missing from the same region early on September 16, 1990. At about 4:30 that morning, a bystander saw the car close to Vest's house. Later the same day, the car was discovered behind a car dealership close to Taylor's home. Vest's body was discovered in her bedroom by a neighbor on the morning of September 16. The medical examiner claims that Vest was essayed. A knife and some scissors that were discovered at the scene were also used to stab her about 20 times. Vest had further wounds, including head wounds and a broken jaw that was probably caused by being struck with a bottle, while the other head wounds were probably brought on by being struck with a metal bar and candlestick. The lamp, metal bar, and bottle were all discovered on the spot. The medical examiner discovered bruising on her chest as well. Trial testimony indicated that the phone line had been disconnected. Vest's home had been broken into and jewelry had been stolen. Taylor and his roommate left the duplex they had been residing in December 1990. The next month, Taylor's former roommate removed the fence from the property. He discovered a jewelry-filled sack that was buried while taking down the fence. The former roommate submitted a statement and turned over the valuables to the police. It was discovered that the jewelry was taken the night of the murder and robbery from Vest's house. Taylor went back to the duplex in January 1991 with Peltz to see his former roommate. The roommate saw Taylor enter the backyard and walk over to where he had previously removed the fence to have a look. The following month, Taylor and his friends paid their old roommate another visit. Taylor entered the backyard and proceeded to the spot where the fence had formerly been. He entered the duplex from the backyard with dirt on his hands, according to a witness who had been at the complex with Taylor. In his testimony, he also stated that when he asked Taylor what he was doing, Taylor responded that he was looking for something that was not where he had left it. Taylor's blood, saliva, and hair samples were taken on February 14, 1991, with the help of a search warrant obtained by the Duval County Sheriff's Office. Taylor inquired after the samples had been taken as to when the results would be available. The officer asked Taylor why was he curious. The genetic material discovered on Vest's clothing matched Taylor's DNA profile, according to testimony from a Florida Department of Law Enforcement expert. Taylor's cellmate, Timothy Cowart, gave testimony throughout the trial. Cowart claims that Taylor said to have participated in an unsuccessful burglary. Taylor said that he and an accomplice had been robbing a mobile home when the owner returned home, and he had stabbed and strangled her. Taylor also admitted that he strangled the girl to make sure that she died. Additionally, Cowart alleged that Taylor had asserted that the prosecution had presented sufficient evidence to support a conviction. Taylor allegedly requested Cowart for help with an escape strategy. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.